देता हुआ अर्घ्य शताब्दियों से इसी तरह गंगा के जल में अपनी एक टांग पर खड़ा है ये शहर, अपनी दूसरी टांग से बिल्कुल बिल्कुल बेखबर. These lines were written by the famous poet Kedarnath Singh, who finds Banaras in everything, sometimes in flowers, sometimes in rituals, sometimes in dead bodies, and sometimes in sleep. Banaras is the land full of whimsical fantasies. The floating earthen lamps, the flying holy colors, the temple bells, the half-naked pujaris, and the magical steps that lead to the world of mythological water. Banaras is no less than a wonderland where every lane and every brick recites its own story. The city that never sleeps. Today, we are going to dive deep into this wonderland with Nilosree Biswas, who is a filmmaker, a writer, a producer with a long-standing experience of many, many years. She has directed and produced many films and videos for renowned global entities. And her book, Banaras of Gods, Humans and Stories, demystifies many aspects of this ancient city called Banaras. Welcome, Nilosree, for agreeing to do this, and we cannot wait as you take us through a guided tour of the city called Banaras. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Anushree, for having me around. And it's hard to take anyone through Benares because Benares is perceived by everyone their own way. So I will share my bit of interpretation and we will let it open to the audience who can interpret theirs. But anyhow, talking about Benares is always engaging, always magical.
Absolutely. And we are just going to feel this magic soon. Why don't we just start with the very title? Let's first understand the essence of the title, why and how you came up with the Banaras of Gods, Humans and Stories. What made you come out with this? And what were the elements that helped you decide that this is the essence and this is my book is going to be all about?
Banaras, I have been traveling to Banaras from mid-90s as an assistant director, and I have shared this in n number of interviews that I have spoken about the book, interviews and discussions about the book. I've always found Banaras multidimensional. I've always found Banaras beyond the statutory understanding of antiquity and faith. To me, Banaras personally is a space of many elements. There's a multitude of elements. And the players in that are very many. If we consider divine as the player, then of course the humans are equally a player in the city. And so are the most intangible things. Even the sights, sounds, the lanes, an old tea shop, everything tells a story there. So very pertinently, the title would have had multiple elements which would give a sense of the notion that Benares is. Benares mostly is a notion. It's also a lived-in city. And to me, that notion is as large as its real existence, the existence in brick and mortar, earth. So that's how the name came in. And I really think that the whole book actually explains how all of these words interplay with each other.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, everything, every lane, every brick, every motor that you come across in Banaras, that it just speaks for itself, I guess. And everyone, as you rightly said, has his or her own right to interpret it in the way they want. Let's just go out of the concept of Banaras and see from a 360-degree view, what do you feel the spirit of Banarasi is all about? When you were roaming, doing your research, you have extensively written about the spirit of Banarasi. in the book, but coming from you, we would love to hear what your feel. What do you think Banarsipan is, and would you relate to that as well?
It is a very interesting thing to share that when you spend a lot of time in Benares, you somehow become a Banarasi. Now, to say that there is a Banarasi pun or a behavioral pattern to typically who are based in Benares, and then when you say that you are also drawn to it or somehow get soaked to it, we need to go back in time when Benares was in a historical time of maybe 19th century or so. Oh, Benares has uh, it has a very two-dimensional approach to its daily life. Right? On one end, there's a very meticulous, disciplined uh, aspect of faith, which is observed. People come for their religious reverence, and they pay their respects to the to whatever faith and however they want to visit the temples and everything. The other aspect of it is a very free spirited life, a life that doesn't bind you, a life that allows you to be really, really unlocked. In the sense, uh, in Benares, one of the earliest observations I had is that people are always on the street. They're always on the street, almost. And sometimes in my initial days in 90s, I used to ask, why are you loitering on the street? It's so crowded. And they used to tell me everybody had their own stories. But while working for this book, one of our colleagues, one of my and my photographer colleague, Irfan's, we had been working and we had at different schedules at different point of time all through the 4 years. And we had a constant companion, one of the very, very well-known tabla artist who is based in Banaras, a very young generation tabla artist called Ravi Tripathi. Ravi is a very dear friend and a pakka Banarasi. And he used to always tell me that this is how Banaras has been. For us, the home is also on the streets. And,
Wow.
and the idea of the home being extended to the lanes is so very palpable. If you walk into the lanes, you'll find so many tea shops, so many little hubs where people are sitting, chatting, they're playing chess. In fact, the book has a photograph of two people playing a chess, two men playing a chess is in front of a closed kirana shop up somewhere in the Godolia or a little later to that, I think somewhere in Bengali Tola it was. So this whole idea of being free spirited, not being governed by any boundaries, is very, very uh, Banaras in its essence. And this comes from that historical timeline when public entertainment in Benares was very upswing, when there were lots of festivals through the year and people's participation in those festivals were absolutely amazing. Night long musical sessions, boat rides, all of which I have mentioned.
Yeah.
And even in early 20th century, there's a story which I mentioned in the book about Sitara Devi, the famous Kathak dancer,
Yeah.
and how whenever she used to come back from Bombay to Benares, she used to take a swim in, uh, in the river. So those little traits are very much the essence of Benares. And then, of course, everyone knows about Ustad Bismillah Khan and how he explains the whole Banarasi nest. So I would say that this is akin to the French phrase of joy the vivere. Well, it is a kind of a khulapan, it's a kind of a unrestricted, abound joy, which also the dwellers have adopted in their cultural space, in their everyday space. I mean, in a ghat, if you go in the evening, you might find somebody playing something with making a little board like that TikTok board we have on the ghat itself. Children are doing something. Some people are. Everyone is very absorbed with their ambience, and they're absolutely oblivious of the world passing by. Aye, so that
Right.
is integral to Benares. That is very, very integral to Benares. Then again, I have also mentioned that this reflects in all aspects of life. Like in Benares, I have never come across people having a very restricted lunch hour or a meal
Hmm.
hour.
Hmm.
People are snacking anywhere you go. Oh, they will offer you kachori, they'll offer you jalebi, they'll ask you to have a glass of thandai. And chai is unbound. Chai and lassi and garam food is absolutely, uh, I mean, you can't say a no. I mean, everywhere I have gone, met the karigars. At any point of time, I was offered kachori, I
Hmm.
was offered sweet, lassis, bountiful, absolutely bountiful. And this also puts together this whole, um, if I may say, this whole bohemia also connects to the larger spiritedness of the city, of 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 its mythology, the
Hmm.
track of mythology, of the idea of a divine entity who also doesn't have a fixed house,
Right.
which is Shiva. Ah, so
Hmm.
with Shiva, you always know Shiva's mythology is about traveling. He's always
Hmm.
traveling from the Himalayas to the plains, and he is a Samshan Bashi. So obviously,
Hmm.
he has no definite sense of home. So I think all that also has influence at a very subconscious level.
Right. The free soul is what Banarsi Pan is, doing whatever, whenever they want to do and right then, and the kind of hospitality they
Absolutely.
offer, of course.
Oh, immense. Hospitality has no limit to it. I mean, if you really love Benares, Banarasis will return that warmth more than you can imagine.
Wow. Wow.
Everybody has to share their stories. एक अजीब सा अपनापन है. There's a
Hmm.
lot of warmth, and there's no feeling of other, like you are
Hmm.
not an outsider.
Yeah.
Once you start getting into the soul of the place, you will be accepted. You'll be
Yeah.
accepted by all rank and file of the city.
Yeah. You become the part of the extended family, my family. It's
Yeah,
all
absolutely.
one together.
Absolutely.
How
Oh,
sweet.
absolutely. Hmm.
Amazing. So, as we gather from the book, what you have written, that Banaras, what today we see, it has become because of several factors, and it's a long way. There were travelers who were coming, there were royal people who were trying to make a mark of them through Banaras. And of course, then slowly, it has transformed into what we see today, and it's still transforming, it's changing day by day. But do you see a different Banaras if we eliminate the power play specifically from Banaras? So let it grow organically. The river is there, people are there, of course, their faith is there. But if we eliminate the power play, how do you see Banaras would stand today?
I think it would have stood the same. The reason being that Benares was never out of power. We
Hmm.
redefine power again. If we pull out the dynamics of any regime, uh, the Gahadawalas, and even before that, at later to that, any regime, just for 1 second, we can just eliminate all these regimes.
Hmm.
And yet, the biggest reason for Benares to become what it is now is the footfall of people, the
Right.
diverse demograph, because there is a river, and the river is so powerful. And apart from uh, its mythological narrative, the actual geomorphological feature, that is Ganges, is a great carrier and a transportation system in itself,
Right.
a gigantic transportation system that connects the entire country at different junctions, especially cutting across the country from up north to the east. So in that understanding also, traders and travelers and visitors and monks, everyone would have come to Banaras in their own quest. And that
Right.
quest would have led to a potential fluidity in the mapping of Banaras.
Wow. You have explained this so beautifully. Right. And as we see the progress, as we see the history throughout Banaras, you have also explained how Banaras been very selective also. So in some matters, like the contributions of Dara Shikoh and the widow of Gwalior, as you have written, Baizabai, we don't see a lot of context playing in the city or a lot of references happening. But as we speak of the others, there are many. So why do you think this differentiation is made by Banaras? While you say it's hospitality, it welcomes all.
I think it still welcomes all, and it will continue to welcome everybody. It's a place where everyone can go. But history has its own flow. Even in world history and in history of India in different contexts, some people are remembered more and some people are remembered less. There are nutritional elements for that. What is the nutritional element? Well, if you create a marker which is very important and which is very tangible,
Right.
obviously your contribution will be remembered a lot on a daily basis. Whether we understand it or not, the present Kashi Vishwanath temple has undergone many changes, many reconstructions, and the way it stands now, the last historical patronage has come from Ahlabai Holkar of Indore. Good. And at that point of time, I explain it through the book. There were a lot of indigenous players, lot of princely kingdoms, which were making palaces, making fortifications, making Brahmapuris, making temples across the city, not only because of their own reason of faith and religiosity, but also as an understanding of how to create their own markers. The more prominent the markers, the
More
easier the recall.
chances. Yeah, that's true.
The
Yeah.
so, so if you have a Baijabai who had made a small, in that vast print of Kashi Vishwanath, if she has made a small little thing, chances are that unless it is discussed and recorded by a lot of historians, she will be forgotten. But the more prominent will go to Ahallabai Holkar because of the structure she had made.
Right.
Once again, here we have to remember that Ahallabai Holkar was a very she had that whole sense of austerity. She was a Hindu widow and she maintained that in her temple building. And and since you have read the book, Kashi Vishwanath gets the highest recall, but her other temples are not so directly associated, like Tarakeshwar, Ratneshwar. Those are also the temples she had built. So there is something about Kashi Vishwanath being revered by millions of people that has also made it, people remember scholarly, scholarly in the scholarship, and also in the oral understanding and the regular daily understanding that Ahlabai was the key figure behind the building of the temple.
Right.
So that is one. As for Darashiko is concerned, and he was a very important person during that point of time. But and also, if you go through the engagement, the inclusiveness of the Sanskrit scholars and the Farsi scholars, through a lot of people have worked on it. And if you see that he was very much, because he got Upanishads translated, he was very much into understanding Hinduism. So he had a lot of patronage there. Of course, because of his own political fate of what happened to him, he has
Yeah,
been of a lesser character in the history.
history. Right. Okay, so there is some lesson for whoever is listening, that if you want to be remembered, make your markers very clear. so so that people can visibly see it, and that becomes a top of the mind recall and is there forever, for centuries.
Yes,
um
and I think the idea of making a marker or at that point of time was driven by a lot of political cultural interest.
right.
The visibility, the
Hmm.
visibility was very important vis-a-vis you're being seen there. Even
Hmm.
today, people, I mean, if anyone is taking any effort in contemporary times, one always considers how would I be seen? So that
Hmm.
idea of self-fashioning is very important.
Right. Okay, moving on to the entertainment scene that Banaras has been through all these years. Um, your conversation with Jagannath Prasad, the master weaver, revealed how some
Hmm.
designs of Banarasi Saris survived the test of time, how some did not. But being working on a particular art for years and then losing some, and maybe you don't like this particular motif and you have to work because the market demands it. How do you think these artists who have been used to a kind of traditional art form at the traditional market are coping with the changing times, the digital times where everything is sold on Amazon?
I think for that, I mean, my answer would be at two levels. At the emotional level, when you lose a part of your craft, it's also losing a part of your existence. And for somebody like Jagannath Prasad, who has been with it for such a long time, and it wasn't very easy. For him and for many artists, for many weavers, Banarasi master karigars, I think it was a tremendous amount of resilience to cope to what was coming to their way. That part, there is a mix of factors. How you, how much of resource you have to adapt to the market. Because in the book, I have mentioned how King Khab disappeared and how hand knot weaving disappeared, how jacquard came in, and how
Hmm.
they co-opted to the jacquard. So it also means that quickly getting yourself into a training mode to understand the technical change. And the
Right.
technical change is always driven by the market and other social, cultural, and
Hmm.
sometimes political factors also. Because at that point of time, in the colonial point of time, they were getting zari from France, which I
France,
have
yeah.
mentioned.
Hmm.
And so it was a huge issue to switch over.
Hmm.
In the process, unfortunately, some people will get left out. But as I said, that it's quite a bit of a factor. And then when post independence, when he also mentions, and others have also confessed to me, in the government policies, pro weaver government policies, the ability to get small loans,
Hmm.
owns the market access, and that
Right.
not only Jagannath Prasad, but also Godavari Singh, who was the master artisan for the toys. Benares
Hmm.
is very famous for the
Hmm.
wooden toys.
Hmm.
He has also shared. But above all, I would say the ability to co-opt into a new system is something which drives the artisans. And the very need that I must not get disconnected with my uh,
With my art.
livelihood,
Yeah.
first, and also because there lies my skill, and the other is of course the artistic
Hmm.
part of it. If I were to consider that there were um, artisans who were not master karigars, but who were
Hmm.
consistently a part of the industry. For them, the livelihood issue is a very big factor for
Right.
everybody, but for them all the more because uh, that is the skill set that they have. So to migrate from that skill set to another skill set is very difficult.
That's true.
So
But they
I
survived.
think for
Yeah, they survived.
they survive. Jagannath particularly is a president award winner, and he had luckily been supported by very, I mean, the doyens of handicrafts in India like Pupul Jaikar and all.
Wow. Yeah.
Different period of time when artisans had that freedom to experiment. There was market. There was always a market force working. I mean, you could go with the market force, you could go upstream, depending on how your mind works. Because I do a lot of art history posts in my social media, and many times I bring in this angle of what reflects in the frame also has the artist's mind working. So the
Right.
artist's
Absolutely.
mind is very important for me. So Jagannath Prasad and his likes had the ability to remain flexible. This flexibility is very important. But I have mentioned in the book that a certain set and a certain pattern of design is still very coveted. Now those designs have gone to very eclectic clientele who would want to retain them as signature pieces. Like
Right.
now also they make customized Banarasis with older motifs, but very few people would agree to make it because that know-how is not always available. And when they agree, it means that it's a lot of effort on their part also. Like today, if you want to go and tell them that I want a Nilambari sari or I want a certain design to come back, which was prevalent in uh, 17th century or 18th century, they would tell you what best they can offer. And on the basis of that mutual understanding, the sari will get woven. In any case, it is not going to be uh, woven with the others which are being woven for the market. So obviously, whether it really turns out to be a masterpiece or not, in that sense, it becomes a signature.
Wow, and it's sounds good that at least they were flexible enough and they received support when they required it the most with the changing
Yes, they
times.
did.
Yeah,
With the changing times, some amount of, I mean, that point of time, India was undergoing a lot of
lot of changes.
changes, and there was Kamala Devi Chattopadhyay who was getting the handicrafts industry in the forefront. She was working with the karigars, Pupul Jaikar, or there was crafts council boards being made. So a lot of things are happening. So Jagannath Prasad's time is reflective of a certain time in India when there was a proactive craft, uh, the rise of the handicrafts in a very different way.
Right.
I have, but to say that, let us not feel disheartened at all that crafts is not something which is not being looked at now. Like I have mentioned, IKEA. IKEA is working with a lot of craftsmen there. There are other organizations who are working with karigars for bespoke kind of results to get saris, stoles, whatever they want to make out of Banarasi. Taj has an initiative in with the Banarasi weavers. I don't know much of the details, but I have heard from the artisans only. So there is a growing interest, there is a sense of revival, which particularly I have mentioned about Gulabi Minakari, which was a medieval craft, which was a Mughal period craft, which disappeared, and how the Hindu artisans have again brought it back
Revived
and
it, yes.
revived it, and the color changes, etc. So there is, this is the power of Benares, that it can hold so many things together, that
Wonderful.
it has the ability, it has that canvas, it has that width, and it has that flexibility to hold so many things. In many other places, things which are not needed in the contemporary times, they wither, they disappear. But still, if you are really intensely searching, you might find something which dated maybe 300 years ago.
Hmm.
But you'll find it somebody's personal collection. But the ability and the idea of holding it back is very significant to Bernard.
Wow, amazing. And talking about the artists only, moving on to music, you've explained that how music was an amalgamation of different kinds at that time, classical and folk and whatnot. So how do you perceive this overlap of the musical narrative that Banaras had that at that time? And do you still think that as musical or entertaining Banaras what was at one point of time, do you feel it is still the same in some of its elements, or that part of it has deviated to other places?
See, you have to consider the biggest socio-cultural, political transition of India vis-a-vis its independence and partition. And so goes without saying that the courtesan culture and the music and the gharana, the way it had flourished in a certain point of time, and has not been in the same that whole golden phase. Everything has a golden phase and a little less glittery space and all. But
Hmm.
yet we must also have that this whole thing that we have so many luminaries of Banaras, us who have adorned our consciousness in a very recent time.
Hmm.
Girija Devi, is
Yeah.
absolutely critical to Hindustani classical music.
Hmm.
Ustad Bismillah Khan. A certain period of time, Ravi Shankar had stayed back
Stayed there.
in Banaras
Yeah.
and practiced. Pandit
Hmm.
Kishan Maharaj, tabla. Anukhi Lal Mishra, tabla. Very many Sarangi players, different ustads, us. But it is also true as a whole that our lives are now driven by Spotify's and all the digital kind of platforms or
Hmm.
apps where you can listen to your music. So, in that sense, something is lost, but then something is revived also. You have somebody like Ravi Tripathi, and his guru is Pandit Kishan Ram Dohkar, who is a Maharashtrian who had moved to Benares, whose family had moved to Benares seven
Hmm.
generations ago. So people like that are very much, pretty much there. Then there are students of Virju Maharaj, who I have featured in the book. There are students of Girija Devi. So there is an ongoing attempt to revive, to do things with music. There is Kabir area, Kabir Chauraha area, where all the musical families related to the Hindustani classical music, usually he had been staying, especially the vocalist and all. So, and also the university in the city, including BHU, has very strong musical heritage,
Right.
huge musical heritage.
Hmm.
So, even if people are not, I mean, people may not choose music as a profession, but there is ongoing engagement with Hindustani classical uh, in the city through the universities at different level. And then, of course, you have a handful of musical instrument makers. I
Hmm.
have recently written, I write international columns. So I've recently written about one of the last in the bastions of tabla maker, or a second generation, a third generation tabla maker called Mumtaz Ali. I've written about him, and there are many people who had left the city. He, the courtesan culture, of course, was reduced after 1950s, and there is no more as such the Tawaif culture,
Hmm.
etc. But that apart, the way we have at one point, the way we knew that there are musical conferences which used to happen throughout India. All of that Benares is attempting to pick up again. There's a thing which happens in Asi Ghat called Subah Hai Benares. Every day, there's a young artist performing very early at the very early hours of the morning. So such things keep happening, and then there are festivals which happen in the winter season mostly. There are private tuitions being given. There are children being tutored into it, and plus at the university level. So I think in a very mixed way, there is a very strong sense of revival.
Right.
I'm not
And
of the opinion of actually always saying that everything is gone by and nothing will come back. I am not in that favor. I try to find the elements of any heritage, any cultural narrative, and how they are being revived. That's very
hmm,
important for
hmm.
me.
And in any way, things are not going to remain the same. I mean, change is the only constant. So we have to
I I
admire.
mean, at any point of time, everything changes, and if it doesn't change, how will we move on? Change
That's
is
true.
the only truth,
Yeah.
and because change is the only truth, we need to find out that, especially in the cultural narrative, in terms of artisans and what they're making, what kind of
Hmm.
product is coming out in the market, there has to be a balance somewhere.
Right.
Hmm. As much as we regret that certain things have disappeared in the test of time, to
Hmm.
put it better, that time has taken away a certain things, time has given a lot of things.
That's true. That's very well
So,
put. Yeah.
so we must, and in Benares, we cannot actually, we cannot understand Benares without this flexibility. It's a forever city which has continuously undergone changes. So we have to add that flexibility in all aspects of life.
Wow. That sounds really beautiful. And then moving on, when since we are talking about the artist and how they remain the same, there is this one artist who stayed in Banaras and written poetries. He wasn't planning to stay there for very long, but he stayed there because he loved what Banaras offered him. And I'm talking about Galib. So coming from Calcutta, he stayed there and has written so much about Banaras after writing about Calcutta. So
The other way around, he was coming from Delhi and going to Calcutta.
okay,
Ah,
okay.
when he made a stopover in Benares,
Hmm,
couple of days. He had thought
hmm,
he would stop over for a couple of days, but that
okay.
couple of days expanded to 6 months. And
Wow.
during this period of time, the collection of poems that he has written, that
Hmm,
is called Chirage there, where the temple lamp, and I wouldn't be the right person to be talking about it other than essentially what I have written in the book, because Benares was very enticing for
hmm,
him. It was a deviation of his life in Delhi, and he was very worked up because of his own personal issues of
hmm,
pension and all. It was a huge getaway for him. Also, the fact that he had closely seen the spiritual and the beautiful aspect of Benares as a Urdu poet. He had a chance to see those elements of Benares,
hmm,
and he describes them in the poetry. Very recently, there's a book which has come up, which is a translation, English translation of a temple lamp, or lamp of the temple, whichever you say. It's by Maz Bilal.
okay.
And it's from Penguin, so you can, and that is a very interesting work. And also one can look into Professor Meher Faruqi's work
Hmm,
on Gali, which was, I think, which was out last year or maybe end of 2020.
hmm,
So those voices are can be tapped to understand Gali better in that space. My own understanding is that Ghalib, for Ghalib, Benares was, Ghalib had been very critical of strong religiosity in his poem, and yet he has been deeply rooted to his own spirituality. So for him, that whole freeness of Banaras, that whole Ganga Jamuna Tehzeeb was very, very beautiful for him to soak in. And Banaras draws you in. Anybody who goes to Banaras, as I said at the beginning of the conversation, that you will be drawn in. So I think he was very drawn into the city. The beauty of its architecture, by then the waterfront was almost developed. It was growing, the palaces
Right.
and the staircases, the ghats were being made. So he entered Benares at a time frame when Benares is skyline also architecturally looked very imposing, very overwhelming, and he we know was very close to courtesans. The courtesan culture is very evident in his poetry, in his life. So I think that also drew him back in the city. It had a strong impact of the music and the idea of poetry, lyrics, sights, sounds. He describes some beautiful sceneries on the ghats. If you go through the translations, you will be
Yeah.
able to sense.
Right, wonderful. So this brings to the last question of this beautiful interview. And since we're talking about culture and music and poets, Nawab Wajid Ali Shah, he was an admirer of all of these. He used to write his own songs. You have so many courtesans, and he appreciated culture. Do you think his changing of center from Awadh to Kolkata during the British time affected the culture of Banaras in many ways and has transformed it into a different direction? Uh, if it wouldn't have happened, then do you think the rawest version would have survived in some other form?
I think this is a very, this question is something very hard to answer. I mean, in political history, there is no if and buts. So, if and buts have to be taken out. And it would be hard to decipher now at that point of time what would have happened if Wajid Ali Shah would have stayed, or in fact, if Awadh would have stayed. As I said, that in history, some things will go. Oh, and I am a great believer that things will change. So it is not dependent on a single ruler, I suppose. Oh,
Right.
there are so many factors added to it that makes a city the way it is. And foremost, it is the people. And the demographic fluidity of Benares makes it what it is. That people come and go. That whole
Right.
idea of being temporal and yet permanent, that is so very deeply linked to the ethos and understanding of Benares. And that, as I said, that in my book also, I have connected it with the mythology as well. I've connected a lot of other lenses, but mythology is one of the lenses. And I personally think that fluidity is a characteristic of all old cities. And so we cannot really say that if it is like saying that had Julius Caesar been in the Empire of Rome, then what would happen?
Then what would it happen? Yeah.
What happened? So that's a very speculative question. But as history is a continuous, free flowing thing, and it is marked by different incidents, I would say that Benares was to become the way it is because of very many factors. And it is really not imperative if, at that point of time, whether Wajid Ali would have stayed and what would have happened. But also because the fact that Wajid Ali Shah's stay or not stay was not governed by him. He was forced
To
to
leave.
reach Calcutta, and again was detained by the British government in Calcutta, in Fort William, and that was not willfully. So I
Well,
think we won't know what is the real answer of this, but I quite love the way Benares has evolved,
turned
Benares has
out to be.
changed, Benares is changing, and I actually believe and think that Benares is a notion, and it's a lived-in experience. It's a brick and mortar, and it's also a notion. And it can be perceived by anybody the way they want it to be. So that is very important. And mostly by driven by the people's understanding of their city.
Wow. So having this conversation with you enticed me to visit Banaras again. I cannot wait till I do it again. I don't know when.
Sure, you
but
must.
yeah. And so I would just like to give one message to whoever is listening. What one would, I'm sure they'll be free spirited and looking at it from their own perspective, but would you like to recommend something, whoever visits Banaras the next time, that please do this or think this or whatever?
No, that would be very unfair on Banaras. Banaras is magnum opus. You should
Wow.
explore your magnum opus the way you want to. And it could be from any lens. It could be from the lens of faith. It could be lens of antiquity. It could be the lens of craft. And you are free to do that, and you are free to again do all of it and find their intersection. And so that is the magic of Benares. And we will, if I specify something, I feel the magic might be lost.
Might not,
so let us retain the magic, the mystique of Benares.
Wow. On that note, thank you, Nilosree, for it was indeed a guided tour. I would say we could imagine Banaras in so many ways. And I hope that whoever is listening wants to go to Banaras, please go, feel it, and please read the book. It's a wonderful book which compiles everything you want to know, the history, the mythology associated with it, and about the artist. So please do get it online and read it. And thank you, Nilosree. All the very best for your upcoming projects.
Thank you so much, Anushree, for having me here. It was wonderful talking to you and wonderful talking to the art pickers. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much.